Back now once again with Theater of the Mind. It may be dark, it may be light. Let's take this journey and find out together. This time, after stakeholder management, we are discussing communications management. As I mentioned before, they are intimately linked, and you should always consider them that way. As we begin then today, we are looking at communications management, and on the graph that you see in front of you, those are the items in green. So you'll see that there are no processes in initiating. In planning, you have one process, which is plan communications management. If you look down to the executing process group, you have one which, oddly enough, is titled manage, right, during execution, not a surprise to us. And then one controlling process. So just 4 processes along the way. And 3 processes along the way. So let's make sure I got that right. Planning, executing, controlling. Yes. All right. So a little bit about each of those. So plan communications management is the part that is based on and needs to be done after stakeholder management. You have to know what the needs of the stakeholders are before you can delve into how you're going to communicate with them. You want to discuss how often, what format, right? Some like PowerPoint, some don't. Some like email, some don't. Some like morning. It's about getting the decision you need when you need it, right? So you want to be aware of that. And then in managed communications, of course, we said that's the executing process group. And as I mentioned before, any process, any at all, that has manage in the title, of course, is in the executing process group. That's what we do. We manage, right? But I love the definition of managed communications. As I mentioned in the key terms conversation that we had some time ago, it is not about an email list. It's not about a cell phone list. It is about information. That's managed communications. And it needs to be thought of in that light. It is create, collect, distribute, store, retrieve, and dispose eventually of information. And of course, you should think back to work performance information, which is the analyzed data, and work performance reports, which are the executive summary version of that. So communication really, frankly, is an easy conversation to have, but if you're preparing for the exam, do not take it lightly. Get all the questions right you can, and this one can be nailed easily. There is a relationship between cost and poor communication, right? So cost and schedule are impacted with poor communication, right? And the greater impact happens later in the project life cycle. That's what I'm trying to demonstrate by this graph, right? So if I have poor communication and poor schedule management early on, it has a cost, but the cost is minimized. Later on in the project, as it's already established, cost to communication and stakeholder assessment are devastating because oftentimes it's a new requirement, a new risk, which means going back to the beginning, a new quality standard even, right? So there's a relationship there that I want you to be aware of. So communication, we will often read, Rita's book mentions this, for example, that it takes 90% of a project manager's time. This is what you are doing almost all the time while your team is doing the actual work and you're guiding them, steering them, coaching them, mentoring them, pushing them if you have to, right? You will spend 90% of your time communicating, right? And so we communicate, for example, with stakeholders about the reports that discuss the deliverables. So I built this graph which is meant to demonstrate this very effect. So let me blow it up for you a little bit. And it's about the project manager and their team and the members and the project management team, that special Illuminati version of the project management team, people that do special tasks, right? And then you have the sponsor and the portfolio manager and the program manager, functional managers above that, with operational managers and customers, business partners, sales, and of course regulatory agencies. So all of those have an impact, and you're busy communicating. If there's one good news for project managers, it's that human beings do not communicate well, and that will keep us in business forever. Good for us, okay? But keep that in mind. So here we go in planned communications management, right? We want to, a comm must be planned, managed, again, to meet the information needs through stakeholder engagement. Do you see how we're still tying communications management and stakeholder engagement together? You can't really separate them, though you put them in various chapters. So, like any process, it has its inputs, tools, and techniques, and outputs. The inputs are pretty standard. The project plan and the charter, right? Because the charter is going to list some high-level stakeholders, their roles and responsibilities, things that tie into your communications needs. And of course, you have your own project documents like the stakeholder register and the requirements documentation, which is part of scope management. EEFs and OPAs, we've discussed that enough. Now my tools, I'm going to go into at length in the next couple of slides, but just know it's Comm requirements analysis and then communication technology. I'll discuss the Comm model over the next few slides, etc. Expert judgment is a thing in communications, right? Do we want to, how do we use this specialized knowledge to address communications? And then, of course, my outputs. When I plan communications management, that's the process. The output is easy. Just move the words around. Largely, it's the communications management plan. And with that, I might do project plan updates and document updates, of course, okay? So here is a sample. Now, I said we were going to discuss the tools in planned communications, such as Comm requirements analysis. Well, here is step one. Here it is, a happy project manager at the foot of the table, your team around the table. How many communications channels do you need? Well, let me blow this up, and I drew it out for you so that you could see it for yourself. So let me move this. And so basically we have the Comm channels that flow like this. I can talk to everybody around the table, and that creates 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 Comm channels already. I could go direct to the people in the middle instead of going around the table. If I whispered something in somebody's ear, the person at the end of the table could also go direct, creating 6 more Comm channels. The person to their left could also reach out directly, so could the others. Frankly, you can create a series of lines that determine your communications channels. That's okay if you have 8 people to assess. But if you don't, if you have, like I've had in a project with 480 stakeholders, imagine drawing that out. I ended up with over 19,000 communication channels. How do I know that? Because instead of drawing it out, I used a formula. N times N minus 1 divided by 2. Don't forget to include the project manager. So N is the number of stakeholders. You yourself are also a stakeholder. So you can draw it out on the exam, or you can use the formula. I recommend the formula, just between you and me. But it's good to draw it out to get a sense of what you're really accomplishing. Here's a picture on this slide with 4 stakeholders, which results in 6 communications channels that I have drawn out here for you. So what I did was I provided this quiz. What I'd like you to do is pause the video at this point, read the questions, use the formula to figure out the communication channels, or draw it out, if you're so inclined. Who am I to say? And then start the video up and I will give you the answers. Now the answer to the first one should be 78. The answer to the second one should be 2,346. And the answer to the last one should be 28 communications channels. What often gets forgotten is you. You yourself are one of the communications channels. Also, you can't combine or subtract stakeholders and then figure the formula. You need to do them individually. Okay. Another and that was the Comm requirements analysis tool, where you will use that formula. After that, the other tools in plan communications management that we talked about was Comm technology. This can take on various forms. Here's the weird one, though. It can also include face-to-face. That is a technology, according to PMI, and it is actually preferred. So don't forget face-to-face communications. Now, in the Comm model, we want to ensure the message is sent and received properly. And so we want to consider informal written, informal verbal, formal written, and formal verbal communications. I've provided examples there. I will point out, though, that as the exam now begins to integrate more agile work, I like to point out on the slides when those really are keen. So in predictive or waterfall project management, you can expect more formal written documentation. Documentation is key to predictive project management. But in agile, it will be more formal verbal, not a lot written. Please note that distinction. The Comm model is one of the few things that the Project Management Institute has not tinkered with too much, has not evolved or changed. So it's basically very similar to any of the Comm models you've ever used before in your life. You have the sender and the receiver. There's a medium over which they transmit the message, and there will be noise. That's what the N is that I put on the slide. The sender encodes the message and transmits. The receiver decodes the message, right? You want to consider noise, right? Length of distance, the current emotional state of the receiver, cultural items, personality, etc. when you are assessing the Comm model application. So there is an advanced version of the Comm model, and basically it's the same as the basic Comm model, except in the advanced model, the receiver has a responsibility to provide feedback. For example, let me tell you what I heard you say, or to ask questions until you are clarified, and that the sender themselves can go, they've got the message I sent, and you're comfortable that you received the message that was sent, providing appropriate feedback. If you'd like to look at these models some more, there is more information on them on page 373 of your PMBOK guide. So I recommend you go there. But it's a basic Comm model. The advanced model is about feedback in it. Okay. So we've discussed the Comm model. Now we're looking at Comm blockers, and I turned that into an acronym, NHL Link. I know Link is normally with a K, but we're just being fun here. NHL Link is the way to remember Comm blockers, right? If I scream at Susan, she's not really hearing me, is she? Right? Because she doesn't appreciate it. So it could be noisy surroundings. Maybe there's hostility between players. The length of distance sometimes is a blocker. Language can be a barrier. There are people I don't understand. It's absolutely true, and I'm not sure I want to ask, right? No, I don't want to insult them for whatever the reason. Language can be a barrier. Improper encoding, negative statements, and cultural items. So we discussed, for example, in the ethics lesson together, that with ethics, you don't want to do ethnocentrism, right? You don't want to judge the world based on your own cultural perspective. Well, that can lead to